Hello you lovely Mario Maker person, my name is Ceave and welcome back. There are tons of little but useful tricks possible in Super Mario Maker. A lot of these small tricks are super useful, but don't fit thematically into any videos. So what we're going to do today is to take a look at a lot of these little advanced techniques at once. The main things which I want to discuss in this video are input conversion, basic spawn blocking and interesting invisible block shenanigans. But there will be a couple of other small tricks as well. So are you ready? Let's do this! Okay, so first let's take a look at some basic input conversions. Input conversions are contraptions which change one input that Mario gives into another one. Here for example Mario triggers a P-switch, but a POW block is triggered as well. Such contraptions are incredibly useful when creating more complicated shenanigans. So this is what a simple P-switch into POW block conversion looks like. As soon as the P-switch is triggered, the spring drops down and triggers the shellmet, which in consequence triggers the POW block. Here we convert a POW block signal into a triggered P-switch. The reason why this works is incredibly simple as well. There is a muncher tower at the top. As soon as a POW is triggered, two munchers decide to leave the game, which allows the big muncher to trigger the P-switch. This P-switch grants Mario a key when triggered. This contraption is even simpler. There is a muncher on top of a brick block hidden at the top. Okay, so far we took a look at really simple ways to convert signals. But is there a really complicated way to convert a signal as well? From our ongoing series, what is the most complicated way to trigger a P-switch, I proudly present the input conversion solution. Okay, so next up, let's take a look at a really simple but incredibly useful trick. It's usually impossible to stack enemies on top of an enemy which lives inside a clown car. But it's still possible to get stacked enemies inside of clown cars. Because if an empty clown car picks up an enemy tower, the enemy tower stays the way it was and is now piloting the clown car. There are tons of really crazy things possible because of this little trick. Here for example, we use this mechanic in order to create a drivable car for Mario. If Mario walks to the right of this platform, the platform slowly starts to accelerate and to drive to the right. But if our still a plumber to me walks into the middle of the platform, our drivable platform suddenly stops. The reason why this works is because there is a Boo and a Muncher tower stacked in the clown car at the bottom. Okay, so next I want to talk about the most useful mini contraption to ever exist in Mario Maker. I like to call this little contraption the triggerer. A triggerer is a shellmet on top of a spring enclosed in a 1 block wide space. So what does a triggerer do? Well, it triggers things as soon as it is loaded. To be precise, it triggers all blocks to its side and above it, but not the ones below it. Triggerer can be spawn blocked, but we need a one-way bump in order to do so. We'll talk about one-way bumps in a second. Here we use the triggerer to trigger vine blocks, mainly as a quick reminder that vine blocks which are triggered but blocked above them start to grow downwards, which is a really useful mechanic as well. Before we talk about one-way bombs and spawn blocking, here's another small but interesting tech. If we have an item trapped on top of a question block which contains another item, interesting things tend to happen once the question block is triggered. We get different results depending on which item is on the top, which item is in the question block and whether the right or left side is blocked. I won't go through everyone in detail, but these interactions can be really useful when working with very little space. Okay, so let's talk about basic spawn blocking. What do I mean with spawn blocking? Spawn blocking is basically preventing an entity from spawning when the room is loaded the first time, but allowing the entity to spawn the second time when the room is loaded. I've actually explained this before on this channel, so we'll only talk through it really quick here. This bullet blaster and thwomp contraption, for example, is spawn blocked when the room is loaded the first time, but because of the one-way bomb explosion, it is able to load the second time the room is loaded. This is a one-way bomb. As soon as this room is loaded, this ice block crushes this bob-omb, which explodes the bob-omb and destroys the the ice block in the process. The next time this bomb is loaded, it won't explode because the ice block won't reload. This is really useful when spawn blocking enemies. If the bomb would explode the second time it is loaded, it would destroy all enemies that are now loaded as well. But since the bomb is a one-way bomb, it won't explode when the enemies are unblocked. Okay, so we are almost done explaining this room, but there is one more interesting tech hidden here. This door is blocked by brick blocks, which means Mario can't go through it as long as there is a brick block at one side of the door. But if both brick blocks are destroyed, it is possible for still a plumber to walk through it. Such a door could be a really interesting element in a puzzle stage, where Mario needs to find a way to open the door from the other side first before he's able to go through it. It should actually be possible to create a custom key system around this concept now that I think about it. I might give this a closer look in the future. Okay, so let's talk about some really interesting invisible block shenanigans. First, here we use an invisible block to change the position of a winged muncher who triggers a P-switch in consequence. Something like this could be an interesting element in a puzzle stage. The next mechanic is probably completely useless, but I thought maybe someone of you wonderful people is able to figure something clever out with this trick. Okay, so cannons, loading and invisible blocks. If cannons are on top of a question block, they drop down as soon as the block is triggered, but reattach to the block when the room is reloaded. If there are cannons floating in the air with an invisible block near them, they drop down. If this block is triggered and the room is reloaded, they still drop down. So here's where things become interesting. Here we have two cannons which are attached to a block that is destroyed by a one-way bomb as soon as the room is loaded. If the room is reloaded, they still drop down. But if an invisible block is triggered, these cannons decide to attach to the block, while the ones before decided not to do so. Next up, let's talk about the really useful invisible block tricks. Invisible blocks can only be triggered from below, but they can be triggered by everything that is able to trigger blocks, as long as the input comes from below. This means that invisible blocks can be triggered by triggerer, which is really cool, because this allows for reverse spawn blocking. Reverse spawn blocking is when an entity is loaded the first time, but not loaded the second or third time this area is loaded. Let's take a look at a small room using this. Here Mario finds himself in a small corridor in one of Bowser's castles. Everything here is peaceful until he reaches the end of the corridor. Sadly for Mario, the exit is blocked by a bullet blaster. But not only this, there is an evil muncher on tracks as well, which starts to destroy huge parts of the floor. Mario's only chance to survive here is by running back to the beginning, but at the beginning a bullet blaster suddenly appeared, which shoots dangerous lava bubbles. The only chance which our plumber has to escape this room alive is to carefully make his way back to the right. Luckily the bullet blaster, which blocked the way before, is now gone because this little triggerer reverse spawn blocked the bullet blaster that was here before. Okay, now let's go really crazy with invisible blocks, because there is a really interesting glitch with them. For some reason, invisible blocks do not destroy enemies when they are triggered. This means that it's possible to entrap basically everything inside an invisible block. Enjoy! So I know what at least someone of you watching this right now is thinking. Is it possible to do this by using triggerer? And the answer is yep. The game treats a shell that triggers a block exactly the same way as Mario triggering a block. And this is, by the way, the solution to last week's magic trick. So I've got a new trick for you, but before we take a look at it, just a quick little announcement. So this video is actually the 99th video on this channel, which means the next video will be number 100. So what I want to do in order to celebrate this is to do a video showcasing my very first and super mediocre Mario Maker levels, while answering some questions you might want to ask me. So if you have any questions you might want to ask me, Mario Maker related or not, feel free to leave me a comment with a question. I'll try to answer as many of them as possible in next week's video. Okay, so here is the trick for next week. The question here is super simple. Why are there shellnets in this bullet blaster? Thanks for watching this little video. I hope this wasn't too technical and that you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and maybe you want to advance your subscription feed by hitting the subscribe button as well. I hope that you have a wonderful day and to see you soon. Goodbye!